Happy to see you. I hope you're all doing well. I started just a tad early here, so please feel free to say hi if you want to shout out where you're from. That would be great. And I've got a few things to share with you today before we get to the wonderful interview that I'm going to share with you that I did with Miss Bonnie Browning. So that is definitely going to be the highlight of today's visit with me, and I cannot wait to share that with you. It's good things. So, also, just while we're sitting here chatting, I thought maybe you might want to know about the quilt that's here behind me because it's kind of on my design wall. That quilt, I made that quilt in, I believe, 1992. And, well, should I say I made the quilt top in 1992? I made it for my nephew, who was 9 years old, I believe, at the time. And not only that, I gave it to him as a Christmas present, saying, I'm sorry it's not quilted, but I'll get it quilted for you as soon as I can. And I had even marked little feather wreaths in the center of each of those white blocks with pencil. This is before nobody told me not to do that. And I was guessing I was going to hand quilt it because I had not even started machine quilting. Anyway, it got folded up, it got put aside, and you know the drill. It gets put aside for years and years, and then it suddenly gets tucked into a box. And then I moved to Denver area, and then I moved to the Levita area, and during all of those, the quilt just never resurfaced. But doing a deep dive reorganization last fall, I came across that quilt. So one of my things to do in the last few weeks was to get this quilt quilted. Shh, don't tell him. I don't think he's watching this today. That he's going to finally get his quilt, and he's now well into his 40s. So, it's been a 31 or 32-year journey. So I'm going to share with you a detail of that quilt. Let's see, do I have that detail? Yeah, this one right here. So you can see what I did for the quilting. I did this on my Bernina Q Matic on the Q24, and I really love this. So the worry that I had was I had already drawn that particular wreath design. I had not done the cross hatching or the diagonal quilting, but it was really on there. And so after I got this quilted, I did some OxyClean and some, let it soak, and I did a laundry, and I would say about 85% of that pencil mark came out. There's still just a little bit, but I think if he loves it and uses it and washes it a couple of more times, it will finally all come out. So anyway, the good news is it all turned out, and there's nothing like getting a quilt finished, right? So I wanted to share that with you because I knew that you would want to be asking me about that. I'm seeing so many of you popping in right now. That's great. It's great to see you all. Hello from all over the place. Goodness gracious. I see Miss Janet. There you are, and Terry and Pat and Susan. Thank you so much for being here. Carol, it's great to have you here today too, because I see you just about once a week. That's wonderful on my online classes. So, all right. And then now I'm going to share with you some other things. So April is Paducah month, right? That's that's big quilt show in Paducah, Kentucky. And I was living in St. Louis, Missouri when I started quilting, and I would go to Paducah. So my first trip to Paducah was 1992, which makes this, other than the COVID years, that makes this, I think, year 32 for me, 33, something like that. Just a lot of years. It's a thing that I love to do. I love the town. I love the people. Mary, it's good to see you. It's been a while. Thank you for saying hello. And so while we're in Paducah, it's called Quilt City. So Hugo, this was his third year to get to go to Paducah. And this is one of the little banners that they have that you can take your picture right there on Main Street, and they have a fun quilt on the the road, and this is a fun thing to do. Now Hugo had a special goal because he's having to do some hand stitching for bindings and things like that, and the thimbles that we had were too small. So the good news for Hugo is he found some thimbles that finally fit. And so he's pretty excited, and we don't buy just one because you know you're going to misplace one. So there are 3 in the thimble drawer, and yes, we have a pins and needles and thimbles drawer. So they all kind of stay together. Pins, needles, and thimbles are in one drawer. And let's see what else I have to share with you. Oh, I have to tell you, we went to this fabulous place. It's called Etc. It's a coffee place that I now know there's 2 of them in Paducah. One right in the downtown area, right near the museum, and the other one's very, very close, walkable from the convention center. But this fellow was found a T-shirt at a thrift shop, you guys, and I had to ask to take the picture. Stitchin', bitchin', and braless. Quilter's life is good. I thought it was great. So I have to bit a plug in. We went to Etc. at least maybe 4 or 5 times. Well, we went enough times that Hugo they had a card that you could punch, and he got a free coffee before the end of that trip. So I wanted to share that with you. Now, I have to tell you, the lady in the coral, the orange there, her name is Silke von Hoffman, and Silke is a friend of mine from Germany. She's there with her friend Waltrid and her husband, and I've been looking forward to seeing Silke for a while. We've been acquainted now for many years, but she does live in Germany. And she asked me, she says, I'm coming to Paducah for the first time. Is there anything that you want me to bring? And I went, well, I'm a really big fan of Maltesers, which I get in the UK, and I know they're around Europe as well. We can find them in the United States, but it's not easy. So she brought Hugo and I bags of Maltesers. And so we're sitting here today having Maltesers. If you have not had a Malteser, it's like a malted milk ball, but I'm sorry, now I'm eating. I'm going to tell you, if you've ever had a Whopper, Whoppers are fine. Maltesers rule. I love Maltesers. So we're having our supply of Maltesers. Now, I judged Paducah this year, which was always a thrill. It's always an honor to do that. But that leaves me a day between judging and when I teach for the show. So Hugo and I drove up to St. Louis. It's just a 2.5-hour drive to see my good friend, cheerleader, and mentor, Suzanne Marshall. She has been one of my biggest inspirations. And so Suzanne and I and Hugo had a little visit. She's doing great. And just for those of you that don't know Suzanne, but she is legendary. She wins big, big, big awards. This is Suzanne with one of her wonderful first place prize winning quilts. That's all hand needle turned applique with outlined hand embroidered stitches and all hand quilted. So that quilt, this shows you a little detail or another different quilt, but this one is the detail, I believe. Nope, this is going to be the musicians. No details today, sorry. And she loves to find manuscripts that are illuminated with illustrations. And some of these old manuscripts have some very quirky characters. So you can see these are designs that she found in old, like 1600s drawings, and then turns them into quilts. So we had a great visit with Suzanne, and that was just super, super, super fun. She is really well known for this quilt. I did an interview with Suzanne on the mastectomy quilt back when Alex was going through her ordeal with her cancer. And if you've not seen this quilt, it tells the story in the upper left corner of a full-figured woman, and then she feels a lump in her breast, so there's that kind of hair exploding like, oh no. And then there's the mammogram in the bottom left. Then there's the surgeons, and she's on the table. The breasts go into the trash can, which is in the bottom, there on the bottom in the blue, right below the letter C. The letter C represents cancer, and there's actually a little skeleton hanging from that C. And then she's got her sutures, so she's laying there in her gown. She says no to the implants in this particular quilt, but then in the bottom right corner, she's singing Life Has Gone On. And I know that Suzanne, her experience was in the 80s, late 80s. She made this quilt in 92. She's still doing great. And it's just a good reminder for all of us, that have to deal with the issue of cancer and other illnesses, that there is hope many times, and this is a great reminder for you ladies to be sure to get your mammograms. And so I'll say that on behalf of Alex today, because she might not said it for a while. So my interview today that I'm going to share with you is with Miss Bonnie Browning. Bonnie has been the show director for Paducah since as long as I can remember, because I was a real baby, and you're going to hear some of that as we go through this. But this is such a heartwarming moment for me, and I know it's heartwarming for Bonnie. We have people that have been movers and shakers in this industry that sometimes they're in the front lines where you see them, but many times they're in the back where you don't know. They're not the famous top best of show winner, but they move the quilt world and make it work. So I hope that you will enjoy this interview that I did with Bonnie. And if you do have any questions, save them till the end, and I will then look and see if there's any questions that you might want to have before we end our visit today. So here is my visit with Bonnie Browning. So you guys, here I am with the Miss Wonderful Queen of AQS, truly, Bonnie Browning. And Bonnie, you have been in the position, I'm going to let you tell us your title. You may have had several, but right now it is...
I'm the Executive Show Director Emerita, which is the female version of Emeritus.
That's awesome. And this is a job that you've had for how many years?
30 years.
30 years.
You know, when I took this job, I thought if I did it 5 years, that would be a long time. And here I've been 30 years.
It's great. And the reason we're having this chat today is because you're having your swan song here at Paducah. You're passing the torch. But I just want everybody to get to know you and some of the experiences that you've had over the years.
Okay.
All right, so that's
Sure.
the goal. So let's go back. Let's go before AQS. Let's go, who was Bonnie Browning before you popped into the AQS picture?
Well, years ago, I was an executive secretary, and I worked at the University of Iowa, and then I worked at Mercy Hospital in Davenport, Iowa. And my husband worked for the JCPenney Company, and he got moved every once in a while. And we moved to Burlington, Iowa, and there really wasn't a place for me to work there. It was a smaller city. And so I was active in the Welcome Wagon group. And we were having a tea one afternoon, and everybody went around the room telling who they were. And every single person that was there did some kind of needlework, but we didn't have a needlework group. And this lady raised her hand and said, if you all want to learn how to make some quilt blocks, I'll teach you how. And so that's where I did like everybody else did. I made a sampler quilt.
Okay.
And, you know, I always laugh because one of the blocks was Grandmother's Flower Garden, the hexagons.
Yeah.
And after I finished that 12-inch block, I said, I've done my lifetime supply of that design. And you know what? I used cotton and a polycotton blend.
Yeah, it's very popular.
And now that we know that doesn't sew together very well. It kind of wrinkles when it sews together. And so I never quilted it. But I learned what I needed to learn about making quilt blocks from doing that sampler quilt.
Sure. So what year would that be about?
About 1978, 79, somewhere in there.
This is kind of during the Renaissance. The revival of quilting has kind of started. And then by the time we get to 86, the Statue of Liberty and all that starts happening, and art quilts are starting to become a thing.
Right.
And I bet you saw some of that.
Yes.
And so what is your job, whatever you're doing, right before the AQS opportunity approaches, and how did that flesh out? And
well, I was a member of the National Quilting Association, which is all run by volunteers. And I was the first vice president for 4 years. And my job was to go to different cities and seek out sites to do their show every year. They moved to a different city every single year.
Right.
And so I worked with hotels and convention centers. And in 1994, I came to the Paducah show, and everybody said, Bonnie, they're looking for a show director here in Paducah. So when I got home, I sent Meredith Schrader an email, I actually wrote a letter at that point.
It was a letter, yeah.
And said that if she was looking for a show director, I was interested in talking to her. Well, so then I get a letter back, and she said, well, We are looking for a show director, but that person has to live in Paducah. And so my husband had retired from Penny's, and we had just built a new house in Nixa, Missouri.
Oh, Nixa.
And so we decided, okay, well, we could move. So we came for the interview, and they hired me. And by August, we were renting a house here and living here in Paducah. So that was the start.
So how was the fit at the first? Were you duck taking to water, or were you a fledgling trying to figure out how to get out of the nest? How was that in the early days for you?
Well, I think from my experience with NQA,
right,
I really, it just flowed. I had no really breaking in. In some ways, I knew more than what they did previously. And so
right.
I just did it.
You just did it. And
yes.
Bonnie, I mean, I my first show here was 92. And so, of course, I would have met you very early on. And I just want everybody to know, because you hired me in 98. I was still kind of a baby quilter, to do the halftime show for the Hobbs Fashion Show at that time.
That's correct.
Which was a huge honor. I had a little 30 minutes to put on a song and dance, and I stood at the back door because I was jumping off the music cliff and praying that the net of quilting would catch me, passing out my business cards to everybody that could. And I have not needed for work since then, and I attribute that to you. And I know that I can say that, but I'm not the only one. I know that your insight into, here's somebody new on the block, bringing them into the quilting community, you've launched a lot of careers.
Yes, we have, and part of that is contestants.
Sure.
Some of it is maybe teachers that were traveling and teaching on a local level. That we brought into, well, and in fact, okay, so 1998, I taught in Paducah, no, 89, okay. 1989, 89. I taught in Paducah for the very first time.
Okay.
And they hired me because I had a lot of 3-hour classes.
Oh.
And yeah. When they come to a conference like this, 3-hour classes is what they want because there's too many things to do.
Sure.
Yes, and it also happened to be the year that Carol Fallert won Best of Show with Corona 2.
Yes.
That was the first machine quilted quilt that was from here in the Paducah show. First quilted quilt. At the end of all my classes, people were saying, how could they put that ribbon on that quilt?
Because quilts cannot be machine.
Oh, at that time, if it wasn't quilted by hand, it wasn't a real quilt. And my reply to that,
people's opinion, it
yes,
was a real quilt, but
yes.
if public opinion was a little different.
Yes. At the end of every class, they asked that question, and my reply was, "It's the best quilt here." And I believe that quilt could still win if it were entered in the show here at Paducah.
It's one of my favorite quilts. I still study it. Yesterday I went to the museum and studied it even more. It's just, it's a legendary quilt, and it deserved that honor regardless of the controversy that came about. Now let's talk about controversies.
Okay.
I'm sure you've seen many. Can you remember some things that might have cropped up that were that y'all had to deal with, and you had to try to deal with a smiling face?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all,
without outing anybody, I should say.
I live for Wednesday at 9:00 when the doors open.
Okay.
After that, really, it just flows, and I just put out the fires. I play fireman all week. One time, we had a vendor who was scheduled to be on the second floor here in the convention center, who wouldn't pay her fee for her booth. And so we couldn't guarantee a spot until the booth fee was paid. And so I moved her down into the first floor of the convention center and put somebody, well, she came to the show and she was livid because she wasn't in her same booth. And she even went to the other booth and took the sign down and wrote her name on, well, anyway, it's hard sometimes to stay on an even keel, and I guess my personality is I don't get rattled too easily. She ended up going home. She didn't stay for the show. But we have the same thing sometimes with teachers. We have a teacher that'll go in a room that is sponsored with machines sponsored by another company, and wear a logo of a competing company on their shirt. We've actually given a teacher a T-shirt to wear.
So, you and I had a conversation about evaluations, and you can have 100 good ones and one bad, and you're going to remember the bad. But I know that you've had 30 years of amazing stories. So tell me a joyful thing that you remember from over the years.
Oh my goodness. The quilt show that they did in Japan for a number of years, the great international quilt festival.
Right.
And it was put on by NHK. And those people came over and met with Meredith Schrader and myself, I don't know, maybe like 3 years in a row while they were contemplating putting that show on. Well, ultimately, they did do the first show. They asked me to come over and judge the show. And they asked me if I would say a few words about what was happening in quilting at the opening ceremony. Now, if we do an opening here, we might have 200 people. There were like 15,000 people on these bleachers.
Wow.
Yes. And so here I am doing a speech with an interpreter, and the princess was on the stage with me, as well as Nancy Cassabaum Baker, who was the wife of Howard Baker, who was the ambassador to Japan at that time. There was a lady from Korea, because we had some exhibits from the U.S. and from Korea there.
Right.
Well, okay, and so I did my little bit at the beginning, and then it was time for the princess to get to go around and see the quilts in the show. And they tried to whisk her away, but she came back and in perfect English said, "This is no fun to do by myself. Will you come with me?" So I got to take her on a tour of the quilts. Well, little did I know that there would be photographers following her everywhere. And so we turned a corner, and here are all these flash bulbs going off.
You had a paparazzi experience.
Oh, I certainly, and more than once, too,
Okay.
more than once. Well, anyway, then she left, and then they opened the show. And Nancy Baker was there, and we had a group of American quilt vendors were there. And I said, "I'd like to introduce you to the quilt vendors." And they had them on what they called America Street. And so we went down and we met them all. And when we got to the end of the aisle, she said, "Bonnie, this would be lovely if you all would come to the ambassador's residence for wine and cheese." And so she gave me her phone number. The next morning I called her. We set up the time. And this was 2011, not long after the terrorist attack.
Right.
And so the taxi could only drop us off at the street. And we had to walk down this big, long driveway to get to the house. Well, so we went in, and I said to her, it would be lovely if we could take a picture of all of us with you and the ambassador. And she said, "Bonnie, I'm not any good at that. You just do it." So I went in, and I found this bay window that had a sofa in front of it and a couple chairs. And then I said, "Is it okay if I move the chairs a little bit?" Okay, so we moved the chairs. We got everybody lined up, and we put 20 cameras on the floor, and their houseman picked up every camera and took a picture.
That's right.
Well, so then the ambassador gave us a tour of what went on in putting this ambassador's residence together. And I didn't realize, but everything that was in that house came from the U.S. The only thing that the U.S. didn't own was the land it sits on.
Wow.
And so then he said, "And the site that you chose for that photograph is where General MacArthur met Emperor Hirohito at the end of World War II, and the general would only allow one photograph to be taken." And then he grinned and he said, "And I should have listened to that." It was a lovely experience.
Yeah.
And I'm not a real history buff, but when you tied it with what I did with quilting,
that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a nice story.
So, and I know you've got stories and stories and stories. I don't want people to not get to hear about the quilt that you've got behind you, because it is yours. So tell them a little bit about that.
It is. Well, I've written 13 books.
That's true, yes.
And so when you do books, you have to make quilts. And the interesting part of this quilt is I did part of it by hand. Part of the applique it's all needle turn, but part of the applique is stitched on by hand. And then I had to finish it for a book. So now, so I had to do the other 2 blocks with the sewing machine. And And so I always use it in my classes because I want people to know it doesn't make any difference whether you do it by hand or a machine, that the look is still going to be the same look that you're going to want when it's all finished. Now, what really killed me was I loved the quilt with the ruching. It's got 2 different kinds of ruche flowers on it. I really wanted it quilted by hand, but I didn't have time. So Irene Rising quilted it for me on her long arm.
I think the Echo quilting's beautiful.
Yes, well, but okay, so now the tip on that is, of course, I made the whole top and I sewed all of those flowers on. She had to pin back every petal to do the quilting on that. And so she said, if you ever do one of these again, don't sew the flowers on. Quilt it first.
And then do the ruching
and then stitch the ruched pieces on.
That's a really smart idea. That's
yes.
great. All right, so now as we wrap this up, I'm just thinking about, you've got an opportunity to say whatever you want to say about the experience, your gratitude. Who would you like to thank? All of that. What would you say to everybody, but also the people that have mattered to you the most?
Well, I think I'd like to talk about the changes I've seen in the quilt industry.
Okay.
And I know that AQS has had a big influence in many of those changes. When they started AQS in 1985, almost everything was done by hand. Mm-hmm. And then Carol Fowler won in 1989. And it wasn't until 2006, 17 years later, that Sharon Schomburg won Best of Show with a long arm quilted quilt. Mm-hmm. 17 years. And what happened in those 17 years was that part of the industry really developed. They had to make the machines. They had to make them so that they could teach people how to use them, teach quilters how to use them.
The quilters had to become competent enough.
Yes.
To compete on that level, too.
Yes, very much so. I did a chronology of things the AQS had been involved in over the 40 years. And, Katrina came along and we collected 10,000 quilts that our warehouse guys sorted into sizes. They shrink wrapped them. We put them on trucks and sent them to Louisiana. When 9/11 happened, quilters always call us and say, what can we do? What can we do? They want to help no matter what it is. After 9/11, quilters sent us 9-inch blocks. Some of them sent us full quilts, and we had them made into quilts. People volunteered to help sew tops and quilt them. And I think we ended up with 138 quilts, and we auctioned those off online.
Wow.
And the fun part of that was the auctions, it was over several days, and the auctions ended at 4 o'clock. Well, we worked from 8 till 4. So about 3:45, I'd go check to see how's the auction doing. And so I'd get in there and there would be a quilt that, okay, so maybe it only had $50 on it. Well, so then I'd start bidding, and now everybody starts bidding. You know how that works online. Right. Well, anyway, I ended up buying 8 of those quilts.
Oh my.
And the ones that I ended up with were quilt guilds I taught for.
Yay.
Or I taught at that had made quilts and sent in. And so I have a lovely collection of red, white, and blue quilts that all came from that.
Cool.
Beyond that, I want people to know that they need to make quilting fun. And if you're not having fun, you need to take some classes and figure out how to do those techniques that you're maybe having problems with. It's my stress reliever.
Yeah.
And literally, I've always said it was sort of like, it was better than a shrink, cheaper than a shrink. Well, maybe not, but
maybe not.
Maybe not. But I have a brand new Bernina 790 Pro sitting in my kitchen that I haven't opened, and that's my retirement present to myself.
Congratulations.
And as we prepare for this show, when I go home at night, I'm tired, and so I decided I didn't want to be staying up till 1 o'clock playing on this new sewing machine, so I'm waiting to open it week after next.
That's wonderful. All right, and what's the future for you?
Well, do you know what? I want some me time. You
What
know,
will that involve, though? With travel or
well,
rest or
both,
okay?
and not having to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, or in some cases this week I was up at 3 o'clock one morning.
Yeah.
But my sister and I are going to go visit my brother in South Carolina in May.
Okay.
I've got some other traveling that I want to do. You know, I'd like to be one of those people that just gets to go and take a 5-day retreat. You know, I just haven't been able to do that.
Yeah.
I'd like to make another quilter too that I could enter in competitions.
Cool.
When you work for AQS, you can't enter.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to being able to do that. And who knows what else. You know, I'm a certified Zentangle teacher.
Right.
And one of the things I want to do, and I've sort of been working on it, but I haven't had time to do the stitching part, is to do a class combining Zentangle drawing and quilting designs for backgrounds. I tell quilters, if they're doing their own background fills, they really need to take a Zentangle class, because all Zentangle is repeating the same line over and over again,
Sure.
just like we do in quilting.
Exactly.
And so I'll do that with AQS and do another iQuilt class.
That's great. Well, I am so grateful to spend this time chatting with you, letting people that may not know you as intimately as many of us get a chance to, just to see your spirit. And it's been a joy. I know I'm grateful, and I know the Schraders have been grateful for all of your service over the years, and we are just wishing you all the best for what lies ahead.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to it.
I am confident that I'll see you again next year.
Well, I live here in Paducah, so I can come to this show pretty easily.
It's going to be hard for you to walk around and be going, nope, don't talk to me. I'm not in charge anymore. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, yes, thank you, Bonnie. I know you're here today. And I just want to say once again, thank you for what you've done to the industry and the way you've embraced quilters. And really, I know it's been a wonderful experience for you, but it's been great for us too. Wishing you all the best on the days that are ahead. I have to tell you all, Bonnie also, back in 2005 started inviting me to do a concert at Paducah. And I've done a concert there maybe every year except one. So we're talking 17 years of concerts. And they're always on Friday evening. And Bonnie would sneak away from the show and come over and sit in the auditorium while I'm doing sound checks and rehearsal. And I don't know if she really wants to come hear me play in a private concert or if she's just trying to get away from the chaos at the show. But I'm taking it as she likes to hear me play and she wanted a private concert. So, Bonnie, thank you so much. And you guys, all of you that are here right now, I would love for you to drop a note in the comment section and just say, Bonnie, thank you for your contribution, because truly she has done an amazing thing in the quilting industry with her position. And it's been a wonderful 30 years. And Bonnie, we wish you all the best in the years to come. So congratulations. Is there any questions, anything that anybody wants to ask? I don't know that I can ask Bonnie today, but if you've got any questions for me, I've been to Paducah a lot, so I definitely, I know the experience there. It's a charming town. I love the vibe that's there. I can't imagine not being in Paducah. It's such a unique show. If you've never been, could you just please put it not on a bucket list, because bucket lists are kind of like they just kind of linger. Put it on your priority list and make 2025 the destination year for you to make it to Paducah, Kentucky, because it will be great. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm just going to say, you guys, thank you for watching today. Thank you for letting me share with you Bonnie's world. And I know that there were many, many other stories as well she could have told. And Bonnie, there's no way you're going to be able to walk around a quilt show and not have people pecking at you still. So I think that'll be kind of a fun thing whenever you're saying, no, you can go talk to somebody else. I'm not in charge anymore. All right, everybody. God bless you all. Thank you for joining today, and I wish you all the best. By the way, I'm going to be doing an interview with astronaut Karen Nyberg. I've already done the interview, but I will be doing that with you on next Wednesday. So if you want to tune in and hear Ricky Timms try to talk to an astronaut, I'll be doing that next week, so please join me for that, okay? All right, talk to you later, guys. Bye-bye.